Welcome back to the Code Ryan podcast. Today, Rafid joins me and we're going to discuss Firebase as well as a cool course that Rafid created on Firebase and diving into the kind of technical details of that. But before we kind of move to the Firebase stuff, Rafid, could you maybe just give me a brief background on kind of what your tech journey looked like so far?
Yes, absolutely. Before I do that, thank you so much, Ryan, for doing this. I'm really excited to be here. So my tech journey. For this, we have to go back about more than 2 decades, actually, because as you can probably see, I look Indian. I've gotten Mexican and Spanish and different things before, but most people say correctly that I'm Indian. I was born in India in 91, and then 5 years later, when it was 1996, my father decided to move our family to Norway, of all places. And he'd always been very interested in computers and got into it like in the 80s when there weren't very many computers around. He was actually the first person to write the first program at the first computer at the university that he attended, like way back in the 80s. He used to bring home computers so that my brother and I, my younger brother, could kind of mess around with them and play games and stuff. So we started with that at around age 5. And then it was when I was, I think, 8 or 9 years old that my father brought home something called Microsoft PowerPoint. And my brother and I were really into drawing and cartoons and all that. And I don't know, Ryan, were you ever into Pokemon?
I was not super into Pokemon, maybe just like slightly. I feel like I had some different games related to Pokemon, but I didn't get super into it. Yeah,
so it's like the late 90s and Pokemon had just come out and it was like a worldwide phenomenon. And so we had the cartoons that we would watch and, the cards and everything like that. And so my brother and I would make these comics for each other, Pokemon comics, super stupid stuff to try to make each other laugh.
Yeah.
And so when my father came home with Microsoft PowerPoint, we started messing around with it. And of course, everyone knows what that is, of course, but we figured out that we could use the draw tool to actually draw Pokemon in PowerPoint, and each slide could basically be turned into a frame. So we started animating Pokemon movies in PowerPoint, and that's kind of how it started. And then fast forward a little bit, my father again came home with what was called Flash at the time. I don't know if you remember that.
I've heard of it. I'm a little familiar with it, but I never kind of remember using it or anything like that. So
it was like the biggest thing in the early 2000s, and it was pretty amazing. You could make movies in it, animation films, games, websites. You could do basically anything. And so that was a big thing, and I just that was it. I was like completely in love with it, and I would come home and just spend hours after school just teaching myself how to do that. And so this is around when I'm 11 years old, 12 years old, and I'm spending time making movies and games, and then I started doing some websites. So it was around that time that I started kind of getting my hands dirty a little bit with coding, although not really properly. And then I got interested more in academics, wanted to become a mathematician, and so I focused more on school for a couple of years. And then I went to University of Waterloo. It's not a well-known university, but it's kind of known as the MIT of Canada. So I traveled from Norway to Canada for 2 years to study there. And then after 2 years, I figured out that I was not cut out to be a mathematician. I could probably get myself through it, but wouldn't be a very good one. So I came home to my parents, tried to figure out what I would do. And that's when I did a little bit of sales, actually, because I didn't have enough experience in any job to get a technical position, which is what I wanted. And then after that, I moved to the city that I currently live in, which is Oslo, the capital of Norway. And that was in 2016. And since then, I've been basically just trying out different things and mostly just building different things using technology. A lot of it for myself, a lot of it for other clients. And so I've got my hands into a lot of different kind of things. So everything from simple HTML and CSS to WordPress websites to something called Ruby on Rails to Python to JavaScript to, a lot of things. And now I am working as a teacher at Scrimba, which I absolutely love. And I've kind of become their Firebase guy, I think. We have as I'm responsible for making Firebase courses. So yeah, that's kind of my tech journey from the beginning to end.
Yeah, that's awesome. It sounds like you have quite a history with like tech related things to where even from a young age, you were kind of interested in like the tech side of things. And then that just kind of grew and grew. And, you know, you almost went down the mathematician path, but you kind of just kept kind of gravitating back towards kind of the tech side of things. So
that I wasn't smart enough to be one.
I don't know.
Hard realization to have.
I don't know about that. I'm sure if you really wanted to, you could. I think with any kind of job, it's like a match of intelligence as well as interest, where I'm sure your intelligence was there, but just that you have to be like interested in a topic like that to really pursue it and really get good at it. And I think it's the same thing with like software engineering, web development. It's like there's probably plenty of people that are smart enough to kind of write code and kind of learn it and do that sort of thing. But if you don't kind of catch that bug, so to speak, and like really enjoy doing it and it interests you, then you're probably never going to be really like good at it and actually enjoy it as a career.
For sure. And that was I think that was the biggest thing for me, because I was like, I could understand that, okay, I'm at this university that is worldwide known for math and computer science. So, you know, you're like getting the best of like certainly Canada, but, you know, there are other people coming from different parts of the world to come here. So don't necessarily compare yourself to them. But I had some friends that were so into it that I could see that they just live and breathe math. That's what they think about all the time. And they get hundreds on all of the tests while I'm kind of struggling in a lot of stuff. And so I was like, okay, well, yeah, you know, they're meant to be that, and maybe I should think about something else. And I'm glad that I did, because I think I could have just forced myself through the whole thing and I would have gone through it, but I don't think I would have been very good at it. So yeah, but you know, it's one of those things that you learn about yourself as you grow up.
Yep, absolutely. And I also think there's a component of it too, to where, you know, if you're like, when I first started coding, I was not good at it, as most people aren't when they first start. And it's hard to like enjoy something when you're not good at it. So I would say, you know, at least, you know, give yourself a few months of doing it to kind of start building the skill and actually gain some proficiency. And then once you do gain a little bit of proficiency and you do start getting good at it, if you still aren't enjoying it at that point and you're still not like kind of feeling interest towards it, then maybe at that point it's not the best route for you. But I would just say really try to stick with it long enough to build some sort of skill, some sort of proficiency, so you're not just in that phase where you don't like it because you're just not good at it and you can't really do anything with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I would say that coding is a very different thing from anything else, I think, because the computer is such a powerful tool that basically everyone has access to now at this point. And combine that with the web and the internet, and you have like literally, you know, take all of the opportunities that anyone had ever in human history, and this dwarfs that, you know, completely. And so you have basically, you can just go to YouTube, you can go to a place like Scrimba or any of the 1,000 other places are there, and just keep learning and learning and learning. And so I completely agree with you that you need to give yourself a little bit of time, because I know how it can feel in the beginning that, you know, coding has this kind of association with maybe being a genius or like really liking math and being a smart type of person. And so you can really think that, oh, well, I wasn't good at those things in school, so therefore it must mean that coding isn't for me. And it couldn't be farther from the truth. I mean, you know, as any other coder would say, that, you know, coding is so much less about math and all that stuff, but more about having some sort of idea and very clearly being able to communicate it to the computer. And programming languages, when you get into that, are a lot more like maybe writing an essay or communicating something very specifically, because the computer is like pretty dumb. It needs to be told exactly what it is. That's really all it is. So if you like breaking down problems, if you see something in the real world that you think, okay, this is a problem that can be fixed using technology, one of the things that I really like, the way that my brain has now become over years and years of doing this, is where other people just sit and kind of complain, oh, well, this is just the way that it is. Me and some of my friends, if I'm with them, we just start talking about, okay, how would you solve this with a web application? If you could connect it to this API and you did this, that, you know, how could you do that? Like real world problem solving. And that I think is so powerful. And so I agree that give yourself at least like 6 months, to get through the beginning part, which is going to be tough. But once you start building stuff and you have good resources that you're following, you really start seeing how your brain changes and you become so resourceful as a result. And just life becomes a lot more fun to live, I think. It really has that deep of an effect.
Absolutely. And I think I really like your approach to where it's like, okay, you have this real world problem that you have in the world. How can I actually solve this with like a web app or, connected to an API or something like that? And I think that for someone starting out, if their like initial projects are something that's just like a real world problem that they're trying to solve themselves and like they're particularly interested in it and they can see that application right away in their own life and solve that problem for themselves, I think that can really kind of trigger that bug for them. As there's a lot of tutorials out there that's like building a to-do app and stuff like that. And I've built those tutorials as well. There's reasons we do that for the sake of it's just something easy to teach a technology. But I think that it could potentially be hard for someone to be like, when am I actually going to use this little kind of fake app that I built? But if you could go build something that actually solves a problem for yourself, I think that could really kind of get you that bug and trigger a lot of that interest there.
Absolutely. And that's kind of what I tried to do with my first Scrimba course, which came out earlier this year, which is you just really need to know a little bit of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And we use Firebase to build our own version of a to-do list app. And it's basically trying to solve a real world problem. And that is that, when you're living by yourself or with other people, you need to kind of keep track of what you need for the house, groceries and things like that. And so when you're making, pasta or something like that, and you say, oh shit, I'm out of, sauce or something like that, you can just go onto the app, which you can install on your phone, and it will look as a mobile app, even though it technically isn't. And you can just put in pasta there, and you'll see a full list of all the things you need. Next time you're out at the grocery store, you can just open it up, and you'll see a list of all of the items, and you can start checking them off as you're putting them in your cart. And so that's just a very simple example of basically it's a to-do list app, but how you can spin it into something that actually can be useful. And I've actually heard from students that have told me about it, that they are actually using this in their lives with their partners and families. And that's what I really like about coding too, is that when you boil it down, most apps in the world actually function exactly the same. In fact, there's even a word for this called CRUD apps, apps where you create, read, update, and delete resources. Think about anything that you use like Twitter and things like that. They're all based on this. You're adding something to the database, you're able to read it, you can update it, and you can delete it. And if you really think about it, and you do this as an exercise for yourself, just look up different services and apps that you use. And unless it's like Google or Netflix or something like that are a little bit more complicated than that, it's usually just that. And so that's one of my favorite things, because that really tells you the universality of all of these problems. You can kind of find these basic things that apply to anything. And so you can make the app look very different, but it's really using the same type of things.
Absolutely. I think once you break it down and kind of realize that most apps are just like an authentication layer, and then you have a front-end user interface layer, and then you have some sort of persistent storage in a database where you can create, read, update, delete, just like he said, then once you get good at those like few core things, you can build so many different apps on top of that.
Absolutely.
And like you said, there are kind of other cases to where maybe you have like Netflix and you get into streaming and different things like that with WebSockets and some more kind of complex things. But I would say the far majority of apps are just like that basic authentication layer, some sort of user interface, and then a persistent database that you can kind of perform those CRUD operations on. So
absolutely.
Kind of with that, Rafid, what kind of got you into Firebase? Was it kind of maybe just an opportunity that you saw at Scrimba that people weren't really kind of covering? So you're like, hey, I've maybe had some experience with this, I want to move this way, or what kind of got you into that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think it was about 2-3 years ago. I was teaching since 2017. I spent a lot of my time teaching kids and teenagers from the ages of 6, 7 and up to 15, 16. So I would run these weekly classes in programming and math, and we would build different projects, basically, game development and web development, really. And so after having done that for a couple of years, and we had done all of the simple stuff, I thought, okay, we really need to teach them how to be able to use a database, because that's really when you can take your apps to the next level, because, you need that whole thing in order to make anything useful. And so I started looking into a couple of different options. And one of the things that I found was Firebase. And I started kind of playing around with it a little bit and tried to learn it enough to be able to teach it. So that's kind of how it started. And then when I joined Scrimba last year, it turned out that we were we were kind of working on a deal with Firebase, which is owned by Google. And so they wanted us to create, for those of you that don't know, I'll just do like a Scrimba, 30-second pitch of it. So if you're used to something like YouTube, which we all are, and that's how you learn a lot of stuff, you can see the limitations of YouTube when it comes to coding-related tutorials. Example, if you are watching a tutorial and you want to pause there and kind of copy the code or mess around with the code, you can't do that because it's just a video, right? It's just dead pixels. And so our CTO, Sindre, who was just this crazy genius of a guy, he invented his own programming language years ago called Imba. And he wanted to teach it to people in order to, increase adoption. And he was like, YouTube is really bad for this. I need to create my own platform for this. So yeah, so he sat down and built Scrimba. And Scrimba, the way that it's different from YouTube is that you can actually interact with the code. So if you pause the code, you can go in and you can change the code and run that version inside of the video, basically, which we call scrims. And then you can also, go back and forward in the scrim, of course, but you can also, you have a little mini browser there, so you can kind of see what the teacher is doing. What this lets us do is make the engagement and interactivity at such a high level that it's hard to beat that experience with anything else. So if you are especially a person who's maybe finding themselves in tutorial hell, which is, where you're just sitting and watching tutorials and you are able to build stuff, but if you don't have other people helping you with that and telling you that, you're kind of lost. And believe me, I've been in that same situation. I don't know about you, Ryan, but Absolutely. I think most developers kind of go through that. It's very normal to do that. And Scrimba actually tries to really do something about that, solve that problem. So one of the things we do is that you're rarely ever watching us do anything for more than a minute or two before we say, pause here and solve this challenge that we give you. And you're supposed to pause and you do it by yourself. That's one thing that's kind of, in all of our courses, they're spread around the whole entire course. And then usually at the end, we have something called solo projects, where now you've seen the teacher do it and done some challenges. You kind of have a good idea of what you're doing. You've got some exposure. Now you're supposed to take everything you've learned and build a project completely by yourself that, is testing all of the things that you're supposed to have learned by going through the course. And these two things, challenges and solo projects, have proved to be so good that our teachers, or our students rather, really feel they master the content after going through a couple of courses.
Gotcha. Cool. And it sounds like the platform does have a lot of cool features to where I create videos on YouTube, but I do recognize the limitations of courses there to where it's like you kind of have to trust that maybe they have the YouTube video open and then they have like my GitHub project open as well. So they're kind of looking at the code, but even there, you're looking at like the final project of the code, or I guess you could check out different commits of the code and stuff like that. But there are limitations there. So it sounds like Scrimba now, does its best to, as a platform, solve some of those kind of platform specific issues there.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that it's very difficult is that in order to even start a tutorial on YouTube, you often need to have the setup exactly right. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to run it. And that's where I feel we lose most of the people, especially the beginners. And what we do is that if you're inside of a scrim, then everything is set up for you. And you can just focus on getting to the coding right away. And we also try to use some, pop culture references and humor, because we have these slides that we use, Google Slides, with some animated GIFs and things like that to kind of make it fun and all that. So yeah, definitely give it a try. With scrims, I think we are trying to encourage more and more people on YouTube to use Scrimba, because you can just record it too and then kind of link to it. Yeah. So it's pretty mind blowing. The first time I saw it, which was years ago, because I kind of knew Pid, one of the founders and the CEO, because we were at the same kind of startup community in Oslo. I also had a startup at the time, and when I first saw it, I was completely blown away. And I think that's the if you haven't seen it before, when you first see it, it's like, oh my god, this is the way it's meant to be, kind of. So yeah.
I'll definitely have to go check that out after this and kind of see how it works. As like you said, I know when I kind of first started, I would watch a YouTube tutorial, but like my versioning of my project will be slightly different, and I'm running into this issue. And as a beginner, some of those like versioning issues and, package.json files, they can be hard to manage as someone like just trying to learn JavaScript. So I think that if you're starting out and you already have that environment set up for you, that is a huge win there. So
absolutely. Yeah.
Maybe to transition a little bit into Firebase a little bit more, could you maybe just give an overview on like what Firebase is and maybe some of the kind of main features that you really like about Firebase?
When you're starting to learn to code and you're in the web development, area of coding, one of the first things you learn is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Then you become a front-end developer. Those are all of the things that you are working on that the customer sees or the user sees in the browser. You're working on the client side, right? Making buttons and making them work and all that kind of stuff. Now, back in the old days, that was one part of development. And then if you, for example, have a form and your customer fills out the form and then presses a button, all of that data would be sent to the server where the backend code would take over. And that is code that you don't really ever see. It's supposed to be secure and all that kind of stuff. And then you would get back something, right? The response, and then you do something with it on the front end. You have these two things. Now, it's still very much like this. You work as a front-end developer or a back-end developer. And if you can do both, it's called full stack. But with Firebase, you can actually be a front-end developer and actually make a powerful app that normally would need a back-end developer or back-end code without needing that. So technically, Firebase is a set of cloud services that you can use as you want, pick and choose, and you can integrate that easily in your app. I'll give you a couple of examples. If you're building, you mentioned authentication earlier. If you're building any kind of app, you probably want the user to create an account and log in. Maybe you want them to sign in using Google or Facebook or anything like that. You can do that very easily using Firebase. Firebase has two different databases. One is called real-time database. That's actually how the company started years ago. It's a very good database to get started with, but if you're looking for something more robust, you probably want to go for Cloud Firestore, and it works in the same way as, a similar way as MongoDB or any of the other NoSQL databases, where you have collections and documents. And Cloud Firestore basically gives you everything that you need to build any kind of application. It's based on JavaScript objects, basically. So if you are a JavaScript developer working with objects, you know exactly how to deal with this. And you can store any kind of data in there, and you can retrieve the data either by just getting all the data once, but you can also get it in real time, which is really just magical when you see it, how they do that. So those are two things. And then the third thing that is worth mentioning is if you want to upload any kind of files, whether that's images, animated GIFs or video, audio, whatever, Firebase also lets you do that in a very easy way. And those are three things that I actually cover in my course, my new course called Learn Firebase, which is kind of supposed to be this reference course for Firebase. So if you're looking for a place to go to see kind of all of the most popular things you'd want to use, you can go there. But yeah, if you're a front-end developer and you're looking to take the next step into not having to learn back-end, but still making something useful, Firebase is a great thing to check out.
Yep, absolutely. And I've used Firebase before and I quite like it. I know that for me, I would consider myself like a front-end focused developer. I do sub back-end stuff and have some experience like working with Django and some different things like that at Postgres and kind of more full stack applications. But also I really like using something like Firebase to where I can let them worry about the database. I could just kind of use their SDK for JavaScript and then kind of go from there. So I think that it's a really good tool to use. And, one question is, does it integrate well with other frameworks like React and, Vue, Angular, all those different things? And kind of how's the kind of documentation for that? Because I know when I use a new tool or a new library, I really look for kind of, okay, do they have like quality documentation that's up to date and allows me to kind of work with this well? Or how does that kind of integration work there with Firebase?
I would say it's very good. Firebase is used for all sorts of things. It's used by front-end developers, but it's also very, very powerful, and it has a lot of other stuff that I mentioned. So back-end developers will also use it because you got, back-end like cloud functions and things like that. iOS developers will use it, Android, Flutter, even people building games in Unity often use Firebase. It's it's meant to be used by anyone basically. As far as integrating with React and Vue and Angular and all those frameworks, no problem at all. In fact, if you go searching for Firebase tutorials on YouTube, you'll often find people teaching you it by using something like React or Vue. So definitely no problem there.
Yep, that's one thing I really like about Firebase as well, is it's been around for a long time. So a lot of people do have a lot of good material on it, to where it's going to be pretty rare to where you run into a situation and there's not already going to be someone that has also run into that situation, has like an article on it or something like that. So maybe it's just one kind of final question here, Rafid. Is there any kind of mistakes that someone should look out for when they start using Firebase, or just kind of any even general recommendations when kind of starting to use it?
Firebase is one of many things out there that you can use. So I don't know about you, but I find myself often just thinking a lot before I'm working on a project, or what is the perfect database or service I should go for. Firebase, Supabase, MongoDB, whatever, all the things that exist out there. Firebase is one of them, and I think it's a good one, especially if you're a beginner. There are some common mistakes when you go for Firebase. I think trying to build something very big too fast, and trying to go for something like I'm going to use cloud functions in Firebase like for my first project and make it really kind of complex. I would say that would be a mistake. If you're starting out with Firebase, I would recommend trying to do the really kind of common stuff first, like authentication and saving to a database and all that. And again, if you're interested in that, you want to check out my course because I cover all of that. But I think for me, I tend to kind of, because there are things about Firebase that you can read about online or why you shouldn't use it, and those are very valid too. But I think if I'm talking to more of the beginner and the intermediate programmer, I would say the thing that really helps me the most to grow as a developer and learn more is not to worry about the specific technology too much, and just kind of focus on building stuff and like building projects and getting those out there, trying to build projects by myself that solve a problem for myself, and getting as many of those out the door as possible, kind of being able to check off I was done with that. And I feel like for that, Firebase is really, really good because there's so much of that they take care of and just give you, easily to integrate. So yeah, I don't know if I answered the question, but that's what I would say.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like one of the biggest mistakes maybe is trying to build something maybe too ambitious right when you're starting to learn kind of Firebase, to learn that technology, to where maybe it's a good idea, like you said, to just start with like an application to where you just implement authentication and then CRUD. So creating resources to save those in your database, and then getting those resources, so reading them, updating them, and then deleting them. If you kind of get that down, then you're already well on your way to being able to build large-scale applications, which is authentication and some sort of CRUD backend.
Yes.
But from there, then you could get into maybe like cloud functions or different kind of things that Firebase offers there. So kind of with that, Rafid, I think we're up on time here, but thank you so much for this conversation here today. I know we already kind of gave a shout out to Scrimba and stuff, but just to give the listeners another place to go find you, Scrimba, and then is there anywhere else that they should go?
Yeah, so I have my courses on Scrimba. So far I have two. Both are based on Firebase. One is called Build a Mobile App with Firebase. And if you're person who feels pretty comfortable with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but you're still kind of a beginner programmer, I would say definitely check that one out first. And then if you're a little bit more advanced and you're looking for, really diving in deep into Firebase, then I would say check out my latest course, which is called Learn Firebase. You'll be able to find both of them on scrimba.com. Other than that, I am on social media too, so you can just kind of search for my name, Rafid Hoda, all in one, on X, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and TikTok. And if you have any questions or anything like that, suggestions for me, please feel free to reach out to me on any of those platforms.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. So me too, Ryan. Thank you so much for inviting me.